The bells tolled across London like a verdict. Thick fog clung to the streets, swallowing every cobblestone in silence. And behind the black-draped carriage that carried the boy king's body, not a single name rang clear for who would follow him. Edward VI was dead, only 15, and gone with no heir, no wife, no child. All that remained was a will hurriedly signed as his breath faded, naming a teenage girl barely older than himself. But the silence among the courtiers said more than any parchment could. It wasn't just a death. It was a collapse. Of bloodlines. Of legitimacy. Of everything the Tudors had built on a name that, perhaps, never truly belonged to them. If the crown had been secure, if royal blood had been unquestionable, there would have been no need for such panic. But in the hours after Edward's last breath, rumors ran faster than any royal messenger. There were whispers that Henry VIII's first son was not his. That and Boleyn's child did not carry the king's blood. That bastards had been crowned while rightful heirs had been buried in forgotten graves or forced into silence. And who would dare speak against the crown when it buries its secrets with full state ceremony? Jane Grey stood in the shadows of the procession, her gloved fingers trembling. They would crown her within days, as Edward's will had ordered. Yet even she could feel it, the weight of a lie dressed in royal velvet. She wasn't mourning Edward. She was mourning the truth. Not far behind her, Mary Tudor watched from behind shuttered windows. She was Henry's first daughter, once declared illegitimate, then reinstated, then ignored. To some, the rightful heir. To others, a Catholic threat. And even she had begun to question whether her father's blood truly ran in her veins. How could a man who broke with the Pope, murdered his wives, and rewrote the laws of heaven be trusted as the source of any sacred lineage? If blood is truth, she whispered to herself, then truth must be stained. At the edge of Whitehall, a foreign diplomat wrote to his court, "England is a kingdom of masks. They mourn the boy, but fear the name." He wasn't wrong. The court's silence was not grief. It was dread. Dread not just of a coming power struggle, but of what might rise from the pages of erased births and signed records, and lovers who had been quietly removed from history. A letter surfaced 3 days later, unmarked, without seal. It spoke of a child born in Calais in 1519 to a woman once loved by the king, but never wed. A name now vanished from any court registry. A baby forgotten by history, yet perhaps not dead. The letter disappeared before it could be reviewed by the royal council. Some whispered that Mary herself destroyed it. Others insisted it was a forgery. But one phrase remained. "He was never yours." And with that, the golden weight of the crown began to feel hollow. If royal blood can be forged, then what have we bowed to all these centuries? They called her a ghost before she died, not because she was forgotten, but because she was never meant to be remembered. Her name was Ellen. She was neither queen nor mistress, neither noble nor servant. She lived between corridors, behind tapestries, inside the hush of Tudor palaces where shadows spoke louder than titles. She was the kind of woman history avoids. Yet within her womb, history may have taken a different shape. Ellen had once been close to Queen Mary's household. Not officially. She was a wet nurse, then a chambermaid, then suddenly gone. Vanished from the court records around the year 1536. The same year, and Boleyn lost her head. The same year Henry wept in public, something no one ever saw him do again. What happened in that window of grief has long been buried under layers of ceremony. But whispers survived. A midwife's note found decades later, hidden in a Bible's binding. It spoke of a child born to a woman not of court, but of court blood. The baby was pale, with a shock of red hair, and eyes like the old king's wrath. Some claimed it was nothing, a rumor, a folk tale. But the note ended with a sentence that would echo like a cracked bell. "He will never be crowned, but he will change who wears it." The boy disappeared into Wales. Raised under a different name. Taught languages no commoner learned. Given books from court, clothing stitched by London tailors. He was not hidden from the world, but hidden from a name. Meanwhile, the Tudors kept warring with themselves. Henry's paranoia grew. Each wife brought fewer heirs and more ghosts. And no one dared ask why he returned, again and again, to the memory of a nameless woman no historian could trace. Ellen was never seen after that year. Some said she joined a convent. Others swore she was buried in secret near Ludlow, under a stone with no markings. But when Elizabeth took the throne, a rider was sent west. No record says who he visited, only that he returned with an old book, sealed in red wax, that never left her chambers again. Elizabeth I never married, never named an heir, and kept her father's final papers locked away from even her closest advisors. In private, she burned letters, refused portraits of herself with children, and once, after a sleepless night, she told her servant, "The crown is a lie we teach to silence truth. If Ellen had carried a son, he would never have ruled. But he may have written letters. He may have sired sons, and those sons may have passed unnoticed through centuries, their veins marked by a truth the world refused to see. There are families in England today who speak older French than they should, who read Latin before they are 5, whose eyes burn strangely under candlelight, and who say, when asked about their ancestry, that it is better not to know. What else lives in silence, born of royal blood and buried in peasant dust? If the throne feared a woman's womb more than a man's sword, perhaps it was because the sword left witnesses. But the womb could rewrite everything. The coronation was quiet, not in ceremony, but in spirit. Jane Grey wore the crown, but it sat too heavily on a head not meant for it. The crowds outside cheered, though their voices trembled. Inside the chapel, her fingers would not stop shaking. She had not asked for this. She had not fought for it. She was chosen because she was easy to move, easy to place, and easier still to forget. Her name appeared at the bottom of Edward's final will, scrawled in a hand that barely held the quill. He had bypassed his half-sisters. Mary, the devout Catholic. Elizabeth, the child of a woman branded witch and whore. And placed instead his cousin Jane at the center of the storm. But even Edward's words could not silence what the blood remembered. Jane was not the next in line. The law knew it. The people knew it. And Jane herself knew it. She was a placeholder for a dynasty unraveling, a quiet girl thrust into a story already cursed. Behind closed doors, advisors argued over lineage, over claims, over papers rewritten and burnt. Some mentioned Ellen's name in whispers, others dismissed her as a myth. But one noble, older than most, said plainly to the others, "We do not crown truth. We crown what the mob accepts." And the mob had not decided yet. Just 9 days after Jane's coronation, the mob found its voice. Mary marched with soldiers and with scripture. She held her dead mother's cross in one hand and a letter from the emperor in the other. To some, she was the true queen. To others, the beginning of terror. But even her enemies could not deny one thing. She was Henry's child, and she did not flinch. Jane, gentle and raised among poets, stood no chance. She was imprisoned without trial, the crown taken from her hands like a toy snatched from a child. Her husband, Guilford, taken from her arms. The walls of the tower closed around her like a second womb, one she would not escape. Inside her cell, she wrote verses from the Psalms, her fingers smudged with ink and fear. She spoke little. She slept less. And once, she whispered to her guard, "I wore the crown, but I think it did not see me." Outside, London adjusted once again to a new name, a new queen, a new version of the truth. The same noble who once warned about the mob now stood silent in Parliament. He watched as Mary declared herself not just queen, but chosen by divine right. And he wondered if God had any say left in these matters. In the crowd, someone asked why Jane had been crowned in the first place. The answer came not from a priest or a politician, but from a washerwoman passing by. She spat into the dirt and said, "Because they needed a girl who wouldn't bite, crowned by mistake, punished by correction." And yet, beneath it all, a deeper wound remained. If Jane was not queen, and Mary ruled through fear, then what was the meaning of blood? What was the cost of a name? And who, among the dead and the erased, should have truly worn the crown? It began as a rumor, like most truths too dangerous to name. A scrap of parchment, no seal, no signature, passed from glove to glove in the darkest halls of the tower. They said it had come from Calais. They said it had waited 16 years in a locked drawer. They said the name written inside it could shatter a monarchy. The council dismissed it immediately. Forged, they said. A trick by the French. A plot by the old Catholic families. But the man who first read it, an aging clerk with ink-stained teeth, never spoke again after the letter vanished from his desk. Some claimed he fell ill. Others swore he was found drowned, his lips stitched with wax. What the letter contained was simple. A confession. A birth. A name that no longer existed in any official record, but once did, briefly, in the margins of a ledger in 1519. The child had no title, only a description: son of the king, not by marriage, not by law, but by blood. The mother's name was erased, replaced by a single word: unsuitable. A cardinal who read the letter fled England within days. He told no one what he had seen, but paid double for his passage. And on his deathbed years later, he left behind a note with one sentence: the crown passed over him, not because he was unworthy, but because he was inconvenient. This was not the first time royal blood had been hidden. It would not be the last. But what made this letter dangerous was not the name it revealed. It was the handwriting. It matched Henry's own. The slant, the force, the way he pressed too hard on the first word of each sentence. Only one man could have written it, and that man had ordered it destroyed. But someone had kept a copy. Elizabeth found it. No one knew how. Perhaps it had been hidden in her mother's things. Perhaps one of her ladies had smuggled it into the court. However it came to her, she read it. She read it twice. She never spoke of it again. Yet from that day forward, she wrote more cautiously. She ordered all birth records reviewed. She began to fear her own blood. And one morning, as she walked alone in the gardens, she said to a servant girl, "Every throne is built on something missing. A truth, a child, a grave." What if the letter was true? What if there was a son, older than Edward, older than Elizabeth, living in exile, raising sons of his own, carrying a claim stronger than anyone left at court? The mere possibility was poison. So the letter disappeared. Again. Burned, they said. Buried, some whispered. Locked in a drawer that no key could open. But it left cracks. Cracks in trust, in loyalty, in the idea that the Tudors were the unbroken line they claimed to be. A single page can unmake 100 years of power. A name never spoken can scream loudest in the right silence. And in that silence, history begins to doubt itself. Elizabeth sat before the mirror, her face painted in white lead, her hair arranged like a crown carved from fire. She had worn many faces, but this one, this mask of power, was the one she wore longest. Outside, the court praised her as the Virgin Queen, the heir of triumph, the last hope of the Tudors. Inside, she carried the weight of something that no title could erase. She had read the letter. She had recognized the hand. She had known what it meant. But she never spoke of it. Not to Cecil. Not to Walsingham. Not even to her confessors. Because silence, she learned, was more powerful than confession. The truth in that letter did not frighten her because it questioned her right to rule. It frightened her because it felt familiar. Too familiar. She remembered being a child, watching her father shift wives like chess pieces, seeing her mother executed while still smelling of rose water. She remembered the whispers about her own legitimacy, the glances at her hair, her eyes, her stubborn pride. And now, this letter. A brother, perhaps. Older, born in exile. Never acknowledged. But still royal. Still real. If she spoke his name, she would unravel everything. Not just her own crown, but the fragile order she had spent years stitching together with blood and ink and theater. So she folded the letter and placed it in a book no one touched. Then she locked the book in a box only she had the key to. And every night, before sleep claimed her, she whispered his name. Not aloud, but inwardly, like a sin she refused to confess. She kept his name safe, not out of love, but out of necessity. Because if the world knew, they would come for him. They would destroy him. And she had no intention of being the queen who let that happen. Instead, she let him live quietly, far from court, far from danger, far from her. But sometimes, when she looked into the faces of the young men brought to court, she saw shadows. Eyes shaped like her father's. Cheekbones that echoed a vanished portrait. And once, just once, she asked a boy from the Welsh border where he had learned Latin. He said, "From my grandfather's grandfather." He was a bastard, but brilliant. Elizabeth said nothing. But later that night, she ordered the boy sent home. With gold. And silence. Some say she wrote a letter of her own. Not a confession. A blessing. A final note to the one who might have been king, had history allowed it. They say she buried it in a chapel no longer marked on any map. Beneath the floor where only her most trusted ever walked. And she wept, not for what was lost, but for what never had the chance to begin. The Virgin Queen, they called her. But virgins do not carry burdens like this. Only queens do. And when she died, the box was never found. Some believe it burned with her papers. Others think it was taken, passed quietly through generations. A family heirloom with no name. only a weight. Elizabeth ruled with brilliance, with fire, with terror and grace. But in her final days, she said something that her ladies never forgot. I wore the crown, but I did not inherit it. I survived it. What she knew, she took with her. Because not every truth is a weapon. Some truths are walls, and she chose to be the last stone. When the Virgin Queen died, no heir stood waiting in the wings. No son, no daughter, only silence. And in that silence, a nation held its breath. Elizabeth's body lay in state, dressed in white, crowned with gold, surrounded by roses. Thousands came to see her. Many wept, but a few watched with unreadable eyes. They were not nobles. They stood at the edge of the crowd. A man with gray in his beard, a boy barely old enough to shave, a woman clutching a worn book. None of them spoke, but one of them left behind a single object, a sealed envelope, placed at the foot of the bier when no one was watching. Its contents were never made public. The guards claimed they burned it. A bishop said he saw poetry inside, but a young maid whispered something different. She said it was a name, written only once, and beneath it, a line that read, "The throne was never ours." But neither was the lie. After Elizabeth, the Tudors were gone. The Stuarts took the crown, and with them came the rewriting of history. Papers vanished. Stories changed. Tombs were resealed. No one spoke of Ellen. No one questioned the gaps in the line. The monarchy needed myth, and the Tudors had given it one. But history does not sleep forever. Today, scholars still debate the gaps. Genetic tests raise questions, only to be buried under protocol. Family trees with missing branches keep showing up in unexpected places. And somewhere, in a quiet village in the north, an elderly woman has a ring. Gold, heavy worn. Inside it, an engraving in Latin. It reads, "Non regnavit, sed generavit." He did not rule, but he begot. She wears it only at funerals. The truth about the Tudor bloodline may never be officially known, but it does not need permission to exist. Because truth, like blood, moves quietly. It seeps through walls. It stains silence. It waits. Elizabeth once said that to be a queen was to walk with ghosts. Perhaps she was right. But the ghost that haunted her most was not her mother. Not Mary. Not even her father. It was the name she never dared speak. The brother she never named. The throne that should have been someone else's. And so we ask ourselves, in this final breath of history, if the crown was built on silence, who dares to speak now?
Histobiograph.